The evening sky over Cedar Ridge stretched endlessly, painted in shades of amber and deep crimson that seemed to bleed into the rolling pastures below. Thomas Bennett stood at the edge of his weathered porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee that had long since grown cold. The silence of the ranch wrapped around him like an old blanket, comfortable yet somehow incomplete. His weathered boots creaked against the wooden planks as he shifted his weight, watching the last of his cattle meander toward the distant water trough. It had been another long day of solitary work, the kind that left his shoulders aching and his mind wandering to places he preferred not to visit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch stretched for miles in every direction, a testament to 3 generations of Bennett's sweat and determination. Yet tonight, it felt more like a beautiful prison than a legacy. Thomas took a sip of the bitter coffee and grimaced, making a mental note to remember to drink it while it was still hot tomorrow. The sound started as barely a whisper against the evening air, so faint he almost dismissed it as wind through the cottonwoods. But as it grew closer, Thomas recognized the familiar rumble of an engine struggling against the gravel road that led to his property. He straightened, setting the mug down on the porch railing with a soft clink. Visitors were rare out here, and unexpected ones even rarer. Through the growing dusk, headlights appeared like twin fireflies dancing across the landscape, weaving slightly, as if the driver was fighting exhaustion or uncertainty. The vehicle that emerged from the darkness was an old pickup truck, its once blue paint faded to the color of weathered denim, with patches of rust blooming along the wheel wells like autumn leaves. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if every mile had been a negotiation between determination and desperation. Thomas watched as the truck came to a shuddering stop near his front gate, the engine coughing twice before falling silent with what sounded almost like relief. The sudden quiet that followed felt heavier than the mechanical noise that had preceded it, pregnant with possibility and uncertainty. For a long moment, nothing happened. The truck sat there like a question waiting to be answered, its windshield reflecting the last rays of daylight. Then the driver's door opened with a protesting creak that carried clearly across the still air. A woman emerged, moving with careful, measured steps that spoke of recent injury or chronic pain. Even in the dim light, Thomas could see the slight favor she gave to her left leg, the way she paused to steady herself against the truck's frame before moving forward. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore clothes that seen hard miles, jeans and a flannel shirt that hung loose on her small frame. But it wasn't the woman alone that caught Thomas's attention and held it like a vice. As she moved toward the back of the truck, 2 small white shapes bounded out behind her, bleating softly in voices that sounded almost musical in the evening air. Twin lambs, no more than a few weeks old by the look of them, stayed close to her heels as she limped toward the truck bed. Their wool was pristine white, almost luminous in the fading light, and they moved with the innocent curiosity of creatures too young to have learned fear. The woman reached into the truck bed and lifted out a pet carrier, handling it with the careful reverence of someone transporting something precious. From within came a sound that made Thomas's eyebrows rise in surprise, a distinctly feline meow that carried an unmistakable French accent in its inflection.
The sound repeated, a melodious meow that seemed almost conversational, as if the cat inside was commenting on their arrival with continental sophistication. Thomas found himself walking down from the porch without conscious decision, his boots crunching softly on the gravel pathway that led to his gate. The woman looked up at his approach, and he could see wariness flicker across her features like shadows cast by firelight. Her eyes were large and dark, holding depths that spoke of experiences that had taught her caution. The twin lambs pressed closer to her legs, their soft bleating taking on a slightly anxious note. "Evening," Thomas called out, keeping his voice gentle and his distance respectful.
You lost?
The woman straightened, as much as her injured leg would allow, squaring her shoulders in a gesture that spoke of pride maintained despite difficult circumstances. "No, sir," she replied, her voice carrying a slight southern drawl that was soft but not weak. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Heard you might be willing to help someone in a bind." Thomas tilted his head, studying her face in the growing twilight. "Heard from who?" "Doc Martinez down at the veterinary clinic in town. Said you've got a good heart and land enough for a few more souls in need of shelter." She gestured toward the lambs, who had begun to explore the immediate area around the truck with tentative steps. "These two lost their mama 3 days ago, bottle feeding them, but they need somewhere safe to grow up. And Brigitte here," she lifted the carrier slightly, eliciting another French-accented meow. "She's been my traveling companion for longer than I care to remember." The name Brigitte brought a small smile to Thomas's lips, despite the serious nature of the conversation. "French cat? Born in New Orleans, raised by a Creole family before she came to me. Still thinks she's too good for regular cat food and prefers her water served at room temperature." There was genuine affection in the woman's voice as she spoke about the cat, the first warmth Thomas had detected since her arrival. Thomas looked from the woman to the lambs, who had discovered a patch of clover near the gate and were sampling it with obvious delight. Their tails wagged like tiny metronomes, and their soft bleating had taken on a contented note. "And you?" he asked, returning his attention to their guardian. "What's your story?" The woman's expression shuddered slightly, walls going up behind her like storm shutters being closed against an approaching hurricane. "I'm between situations right now. Looking for somewhere to land for a while, earn my keep, and make sure these three have what they need." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "I can work, despite the limp. Know my way around animals, and I'm not afraid of hard labor." Thomas studied her for a long moment, taking in the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held herself despite obvious fatigue, and the protective stance she maintained over her unusual family. The lambs had wandered closer to the gate, their dark eyes curious and trusting as they gazed up at him through the fence rails. From the carrier came another melodious meow, as if Brigitte was adding her own commentary to the negotiations. "What happened to the leg?" Thomas's hand moved unconsciously to his left thigh, a gesture so brief he almost missed it. "Accident a few weeks back. Doctor says it'll heal fine with time and rest, but rest is a luxury I haven't been able to afford lately." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding more than she was saying. The picture was becoming clearer, painted in the universal language of people who had fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. He'd seen it before, in the eyes of ranch hands who'd lost their jobs to mechanization, in the faces of families who'd lost their farms to drought or debt. Pride and desperation walking hand in hand, trying to maintain dignity while asking for help. "I don't usually take in strays," Thomas said finally, echoing words that felt strange on his tongue even as he spoke them. The woman's chin lifted slightly, a spark of defiance flashing at her dark eyes. "We're not strays. We're travelers who happen to need a place to rest for a while." Thomas found himself suppressing a smile at her quick comeback. There was spirit in this woman, fire that hadn't been extinguished by whatever circumstances had brought her to his gate with 2 orphaned lambs and a French-speaking cat. "Got names?" "The lambs are Bonnie and Clyde, born 2 days apart but inseparable as twins. Brigitte you've met, and I'm Claire." She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to add more. "Claire Dubois." "French name too?" "Louisiana French. Family's been there before the purchase." There was pride in her voice, the kind that came from deep roots and strong traditions. Thomas opened the gate, the hinges protesting with a familiar squeak that he'd been meaning to oil for months. The lambs immediately trotted through, their hooves making soft clicking sounds on the gravel as they explored this new territory with obvious delight. Bonnie, slightly smaller than her companion, discovered a dandelion and began to investigate it with intense concentration. Clyde, bolder by nature, approached Thomas's boots and sniffed them with scientific thoroughness. "They're young," Thomas observed, kneeling down to let Clyde explore his outstretched hand. The lamb's nose was soft and warm, and his tiny tail wagged furiously as he decided Thomas passed inspection. 6 weeks for Bonnie, 8 for Clyde.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Found them in a field after a storm. Their mama didn't make it through the night. Been bottle feeding them every 4 hours since. Claire's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been maintaining that feeding schedule while dealing with her own recovery and the challenges of life on the road. Thomas stood, brushing dust from his knees. That's a lot of work for someone who needs to be resting that leg. Claire's jaw tightened slightly. They needed someone. I was available. The simple statement spoke volumes about her character, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. How long since you've had a decent meal? Not fast food or whatever you can heat up in a truck cab, but real food. Claire's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying her attempt to appear self-sufficient. Color rose in her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. I'm not looking for charity. Wasn't offering charity. Was thinking about making some supper and realizing I always cook too much for one person. Seems wasteful to let it go to the dogs when there are folks who might appreciate it. Thomas gestured toward the house, where warm light spilled from the kitchen windows. Besides, these two, he nodded toward the lambs, look like they could use some proper shelter for the night, and I imagine Brigitte has opinions about spending another night in a truck cab. As if summoned by her name, the cat in the carrier let out a particularly indignant meow that seemed to convey volumes about her current accommodations and her expectations for improvement. Claire looked toward the house, and Thomas could see the war being waged between her pride and her practical needs. The lambs had wandered closer to the porch, drawn by the promise of shelter and perhaps sensing the welcoming atmosphere that even their young minds could appreciate. Bonnie had discovered a patch of soft grass near the front steps and was already settling down for what looked like a nap. I can pay, Claire said finally. Not much, but I've got a little saved. Thomas shook his head. Keep your money. What I could use is someone who knows animals and isn't afraid of work. Been trying to manage this place solo since my hired hand retired last month, and it's more than one person should handle. It wasn't entirely true. He'd been managing alone for longer than that, but it wasn't entirely false either. The ranch was big, and there were always more tasks than hours in the day. Claire studied his face in the growing darkness, searching for signs of pity or condescension. Finding neither, she nodded slowly. What kind of work? Feeding, muck and stalls, fence repair, general maintenance. Nothing too strenuous for someone with a healing leg, but enough to earn room and board for you and your family. Thomas found himself using the word family naturally, already thinking of the woman and her charges as a unit. Room and board? Thomas pointed toward a small building set apart from the main house, barely visible in the gathering darkness. Foreman's cabin. Been empty for a while, but it's clean and furnished. Has its own bathroom and a small kitchen. Should be plenty of space for 4, even if one of them has opinions about the accommodations. Another meow from the carrier, this one sounding almost approving. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas could practically hear the wheels turning in her mind as she weighed options and considered angles. The lambs had no such hesitation. Clyde had discovered the porch steps and was attempting to climb them, his small hooves slipping on the smooth wood. Bonnie watched his efforts with the patient air of someone who had seen this performance before. There would have to be conditions, Claire said finally. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Such as what? Brigitte doesn't hunt. She's strictly an indoor cat, but she expects quality accommodations and regular conversation. The lambs will need to be bottle-fed until they're old enough to wean, and they're not livestock, they're pets. When they're grown, they stay pets. Fair enough. Any other requirements? Claire hesitated, and Thomas could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. If this arrangement works out, if we all settle in well and prove we're worth keeping around, she paused, taking a deep breath. I'd like the chance to learn about ranching. Real ranching, not just the daily chores.
I've been thinking about what comes next in my life, and this feels like it might be something I could be good at. Thomas considered this, impressed by her long-term thinking despite her current circumstances. What's your background? What did you do before you ended up traveling with 2 lambs and a French cat? Veterinary technician. Worked at a clinic in Baton Rouge before. She trailed off, and Thomas didn't press. Everyone had their before stories, and most of them included chapters that were better left closed. That explains why you know about bottle feeding and animal care, among other things. Claire shifted the carrier to her other arm, and Thomas realized she'd been standing on her injured leg for quite a while during their conversation. Why don't we get you all settled, and we can work out the details over supper, Thomas suggested, gesturing toward the cabin. I've got some lamb's milk replacement in the barn, probably better than whatever you've been using from the road. Claire's face brightened noticeably. They've been getting by on goat's milk from whatever store I could find, but it's not ideal. Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. Well, we can fix that. Come on, let's get everyone comfortable. They walked toward the cabin together, an unusual procession in the gathering darkness. Thomas led the way, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Claire followed, limping slightly, but keeping pace, the cat carrier in her arms. The twin lambs brought up the rear, trotting along with the confident air of animals who had found their new adventure acceptable. The foreman's cabin sat about 50 yards from the main house, nestled under a large oak tree that provided natural shade and a sense of privacy. Thomas had built it himself 15 years ago, back when he'd had dreams of expanding the operation and hiring more help. Life had taken different turns, but the cabin had remained patient, waiting for occupants who might appreciate its simple comforts. Thomas produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the front door, reaching inside to flip on the lights. The interior revealed itself in warm yellow illumination, showing a space that was small but well designed. The main room combined living area and kitchen, with a compact sofa facing a stone fireplace and a kitchenette along a wall equipped with basic appliances. A short hallway led to a bedroom and bathroom in the back. "It's not fancy," Thomas said, watching Claire's face as she took in her surroundings, "but it's solid and clean."
Claire set the cat carrier down on the small dining table and looked around with obvious appreciation. "It's perfect," she said, and Thomas could hear the genuine relief in her voice. "How long since it's been occupied?" "About 6 months. I keep it maintained, though. Check on it weekly, run the water, make sure everything works." Thomas opened a few cabinets, revealing basic dishes, cookware, and some non-perishable food items. "Stocked it with basics last time I was in town, just in case." "Just in case what?" Thomas paused, realizing he didn't have a good answer for that question. He'd been stocking the cabin for months without really knowing why, some instinct telling him that someday he might need to offer shelter to someone who needed it. "Just in case," he repeated with a shrug. Claire opened the cat carrier, and Brigitte emerged with the regal bearing of a queen surveying new quarters. She was a beautiful cat, Thomas noted, with long gray fur and bright green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings with critical assessment. She stretched elaborately, arching her back and extending her claws, before beginning a thorough exploration of the cabin. "Meow," she commented, her tone suggesting cautious approval. "She says the accommodations are acceptable, but she expects the service to improve," Claire translated with a straight face. Thomas laughed, surprised by the sound of his own laughter echoing in the small space. "I'll make sure to tell the management." The lambs had followed them inside and were now investigating this new environment with the thorough intensity that only young animals could bring to such tasks. Bonnie had discovered a small rug near the fireplace and was testing its suitability as a bed. Clyde was more interested in the kitchen area, perhaps sensing that food preparation happened there. "They'll need to go out every few hours," Claire said, watching her charges explore. "But they're pretty good about letting you know when they need something." "There's a small fenced area behind the cabin, originally intended for a garden but never used.
Should be perfect for them to have some outdoor time safely. Thomas moved to the back door and opened it, revealing a neat rectangle of grass enclosed by white wooden fencing. Previous occupant was going to grow vegetables, but it never happened. Claire joined him at the door, and Thomas caught a whiff of her scent, something clean and faintly floral that seemed out of place with her road-worn appearance, but entirely fitting with her gentle way with the animals. "It's like it was meant to be," she said softly. Thomas found himself looking at her profile in the doorway light, noting the determined set of her jaw, the way her dark hair caught the illumination, and the genuine gratitude in her expression as she surveyed what would be her new home. "Maybe it was," he said quietly. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the lambs discover their new territory. Bonnie had found a dandelion growing near the fence and was investigating it with scientific thoroughness. Clyde had located a stick and was carrying it around like a prize, his tail wagging furiously. "I should let you get settled," Thomas said, finally, stepping back from the doorway. "There's a phone on the kitchen counter. My number's written on the pad next to it. Call if you need anything tonight, no matter how small." Claire turned to face him, and Thomas was struck by the openness in her expression, as if some wall had come down during their conversation. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this. I know you don't know me from Adam, and taking in strangers isn't something most people would do." "Most strangers don't arrive with twin lambs and a French cat," Thomas pointed out with a smile. "Besides, something tells me you're not most people." Color rose in Claire's cheeks again, and she looked down at her hands. "I promise you won't regret this. We'll earn our keep, all of us." "I believe you will." Thomas moved toward the front door, then paused. "One more thing. Tomorrow morning, if you wake up and decide this was all a mistake, if you want to get back in that truck and keep moving, that's fine. No questions asked, no hard feelings. But if you decide to stay, even just for a while, then we do this right. No more sleeping in truck cabs, no more missing meals, no more pushing yourself when you should be healing. Deal?" Claire studied his face, searching for something she seemed to find satisfactory. "Deal. But the same goes for you. If you decide we're more trouble than we're worth, you tell me straight. I won't make you uncomfortable in your own home by overstaying our welcome." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "Fair enough. Now get some rest. Morning comes early around here, but breakfast comes first." He let himself out of the cabin and walked slowly back toward the main house, his mind churning with thoughts about the unusual turn his evening had taken. When he stood on his porch an hour ago, he was a solitary rancher, facing another quiet night in an empty house. Now he was responsible for a woman with an injured leg, 2 orphaned lambs, and a cat with a French accent and strong opinions about her accommodations. The practical part of his mind wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The ranch was his sanctuary, his ordered world where he controlled the variables and managed the challenges according to his own timeline and methods. Adding 4 new residents, especially ones with their own needs and complications, would change everything. But as he climbed the steps to his porch and looked back toward the warm lights glowing in the cabin windows, he found he wasn't troubled by the prospect of change. For the first time in longer than he cared to remember, the ranch felt alive with possibility rather than empty with routine. Inside the main house, he moved through his evening rituals with distracted efficiency. He checked the weather forecast, made notes about tomorrow's tasks, and prepared for bed. But his thoughts kept drifting to the small family settling into the foreman's cabin. He wondered about Claire's story, about what had brought her to his gate with her unusual companions. He wondered about the injury that caused her limp, about the circumstances that had left her traveling alone with 2 orphaned lambs and a cat named Brigitte. Most of all, he wondered about the feeling that had settled in his chest when she had looked around the cabin and said, "It's perfect." It had been something like recognition, as if a part of him had been waiting for exactly this moment without knowing it. Through his bedroom window, he could see the soft glow of lights in the cabin, and he found himself hoping that Claire would choose to stay when morning came, not just for a few days or weeks, but long enough to see what might grow from this unexpected beginning. In the distance, he heard the soft bleating of the lambs as they settled into their new surroundings, and the sound made him smile as he drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new routines, but tonight, for the first time in longer than he cared to remember, Thomas Bennett fell asleep to the comforting sounds of life being lived in the spaces around his own. The rooster's crow echoed across Cedar Ridge at precisely 5:30, just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Thomas was already awake, coffee brewing in the kitchen while he pulled on his work boots. Through the window, he could see movement in the cabin, warm light spilling from the windows suggesting that Claire is an early riser too. When he stepped onto his porch 20 minutes later, steaming mug in hand, Claire was already outside with the lambs. She moved carefully, favoring her injured leg, but her movements were efficient and practiced as she filled a small water dish for Bonnie and Clyde. Both lambs stayed close to her feet, occasionally bumping against her legs in displays of affection that made her smile despite the early hour. "Morning," Thomas called out, raising his coffee mug. Claire looked up, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "Good morning. Hope we didn't wake you." Brigitte decided sunrise was an appropriate time for breakfast, and once she starts complaining, the whole household knows about it. As if summoned by her name, the gray cat appeared in the cabin doorway, stretching luxuriously before padding down the front steps with the dignified air of royalty making an entrance. She surveyed the morning scene with green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings with critical assessment. She settled herself in a patch of early sunlight. "She looks like she's holding court," Thomas observed with amusement. "She is. Brigitte has very specific ideas about how a proper household should function, and she's not shy about sharing her opinions." Claire straightened slowly, one hand briefly touching her injured thigh. "I was hoping to get started on those chores you mentioned."
The lambs are fed and settled for now. Thomas studied her face, noting the slight tightness around her eyes that spoke of discomfort she was trying to hide. "How's the leg this morning?" "Better," she said quickly, then seemed to reconsider the automatic response. "Stiff, but that's normal. Moving around helps." "Good to hear. But we're not starting with fence repair or anything too strenuous. Thought we'd begin with feeding the horses, let you get a feel for the routine." Thomas gestured toward the barn, a large red structure that dominated the center of the ranch complex. "Besides, I'd like to see how you handle the animals before I trust you with the more temperamental ones." Claire's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have temperamental horses?" "I have Tornado." The name apparently required no further explanation because Claire nodded with the understanding of someone who had worked with difficult animals before. "Every stable has one. What's his particular charm?" "He's a former rodeo bronc who thinks retirement means he gets to terrorize anyone who enters his stall. Previous owner couldn't handle him, so he ended up here. We've reached an understanding over the years, but he doesn't extend that courtesy to strangers." They walked toward the barn together, the lambs trotting alongside like small, woolly escorts. Bonnie had discovered that morning dew made the grass taste different and was sampling patches with scientific thoroughness. Clyde was more interested in the various new scents that surrounded them, his small nose working overtime to catalog the complex bouquet of hay, horses, and the general essence of ranch life. The barn was larger inside than it appeared from the outside, with 2 rows of stalls running the length of the building and a wide center aisle that could accommodate tractors and equipment. The air was thick with the comfortable scents of hay, grain, and animals, underscored by the subtle aroma of well-maintained leather and oil. Morning sunlight streamed through high windows, creating golden rectangles on the concrete floor. 5 horses looked out over their stall doors with varying degrees of interest. Thomas moved down the line, introducing each one like old friends. "That's Melody, my oldest mare. Sweet as pie, but arthritic in her front legs. Next to her is Duke, solid as a rock, never met a situation that ruffled him. Then we have Starlight. She's young and still learning manners, but eager to please." He paused at the 4th stall, where a compact bay mare with intelligent eyes watched their approach with obvious curiosity. "This is Luna. She's my personal favorite, though don't tell the others. Smart as a whip and reads people better than most humans do." "And Tornado?" Claire asked, though she was already looking toward the last stall where she could see the outline of a large, dark horse standing with his back to them. End of the line, where he can't terrorize the others. Thomas approached the stall cautiously, and Claire noticed that even he maintained a respectful distance from the door. "Tornado, we have company." The horse turned slowly, revealing himself to be a massive black gelding with white markings on his face and legs. His eyes held an intelligence that bordered on cunning, and when he looked at Claire, she had the distinct impression she was being evaluated and found potentially wanting. "He's magnificent," Claire said softly, and Thomas was surprised by the genuine admiration in her voice. "How old?" 15, according to his papers. Been here for 3 years, and we're still negotiating the terms of our relationship." Thomas pulled a halter from a hook near the stall. "I'll handle him today, but eventually you'll need to work with all of them." They spent the next hour moving through the morning feeding routine. Claire proved herself competent and intuitive with the horses, reading their individual personalities quickly and adapting her approach accordingly. Melody appreciated gentle words and soft touches. Duke was business first, but responded well to confident handling. Starlight was playful and needed patience when she tried to investigate every pocket and tool with her inquisitive nose. Luna, however, seemed to take an immediate liking to Claire. The mare nickered softly when Claire approached her stall and stood perfectly still while Claire checked her water and hay. When Claire spoke to her in the same gentle tone she used with the lambs, her ears pricked forward with obvious pleasure. "She likes you," Thomas observed, watching the interaction with interest. "Animals usually do. I think they sense that I'm not going to rush them or ask for more than they're ready to give." Claire stroked Luna's neck, and the mare leaned into the touch with a contented sigh. Horses especially respond to honesty. They know when you're afraid or frustrated or trying to hide something. "And what do they sense from you?" Claire considered the question seriously, her hand still moving in slow circles on Luna's neck. "Probably that I understand what it's like to be cautious about trusting new situations, but also that I'm willing to try if they are." The honesty of her answer caught Thomas off guard, and he found himself studying her profile as she continued to gentle the mare. There was something about the way she interacted with the animals that spoke of deep experience, not just with their care, but with their emotional needs. It suggested someone who had learned patience through necessity, understanding through her own experiences with vulnerability. When they finished with the horses, Thomas led Claire to a large paddock behind the barn where a small herd of cattle grazed in the morning sun. 23 head, he said, leaning against the fence. Mostly Angus, with a few crossbreeds. Nothing fancy, but they're good stock. Claire climbed carefully onto the bottom rail of the fence, taking weight off her injured leg while getting a better view of the cattle. "They look healthy. Good body condition, clear eyes. You do your own veterinary work?" "Most of it. Doc Martinez comes out for the serious stuff, but I handle routine care and minor issues." He glanced at her. "Might be nice to have someone around who actually knows what they're doing instead of just winging it." "I'd be happy to help with that. I miss the diagnostic work, the problem solving. There's something satisfying about figuring out what's wrong and being able to fix it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cattle graze and enjoying the warmth of the climbing sun. The lambs had discovered a butterfly and were attempting to follow its erratic flight pattern, much to Bridget's amusement. The cat had positioned herself on a fence post where she could observe the proceedings with the air of a theater critic reviewing a particularly entertaining performance. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said eventually. Claire tensed slightly, but nodded. "Shoot." "How did you end up with Bonnie and Clyde? I mean, I know you said you found them after a storm, but what were you doing in a field during bad weather?" Claire was quiet for so long that Thomas began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I was camping. Had been for about a week, trying to figure out what to do next. The storm came up fast, and I was looking for better shelter when I heard them crying."
"Camping for a week? That suggests you were between more than just jobs." "You could say that." Claire's fingers drummed against the fence rail, a nervous gesture that contradicted her calm tone. I had to leave my previous situation pretty suddenly. Didn't have time to make proper arrangements for where I was going next. Thomas waited, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to push. In his experience, people shared what they were ready to share when they were ready to share it. Pressing for details usually just made them shut down completely. The veterinary clinic where I worked, Claire continued after another long pause, it was owned by my ex-husband. When the marriage ended, so did my job. And my housing, since we lived above the clinic. It was all tied together in ways that made staying impossible. The careful neutrality in her voice told Thomas volumes about what she wasn't saying. Messy divorce. You could say that? Claire's laugh held no humor. He made it very clear that my continued presence in town would be unwelcome. So, I left. Thomas felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, the kind he'd always felt when confronted with bullies who used their power to hurt people who couldn't fight back. Sounds like a real prince. He had his good points, or I thought he did when I married him, but power has a way of revealing who people really are underneath the surface charm. Claire turned to look at him directly. I'm not running from anything illegal, if that's what you're wondering. No outstanding warrants or unpaid debts. Just a woman who made some poor choices and is trying to make better ones. I wasn't worried about warrants, Thomas said honestly, but I appreciate you telling me. They climbed down from the fence and headed back toward the barn where Thomas wanted to show Claire the equipment shed and explain the basic maintenance routines. As they walked, the lambs discovered a small hill and began racing up and down it with the pure joy that only young animals could display. Their antics drew laughter from both adults and an approving "meow" from Brigitte. They're good for the soul, Claire observed, watching Bonnie attempt to leap over a small rock and tumble in a graceful somersault. Animals don't hold grudges or worry about the future. They just live in the moment and find joy where they can. Is that your philosophy too? I'm working on it. Spent too many years planning and worrying and trying to control outcomes. Didn't get me anywhere good. Claire brushed dust from her jeans as they entered the equipment shed. These days, I'm learning to take things as they come and be grateful for what I have, instead of anxious about what I might lose. The shed was organized with military precision. Every tool in its designated place and clearly labeled. Thomas showed Claire where to find basic supplies, explained his system for tracking maintenance schedules, and pointed out the first aid kit that he kept stocked for both human and animal emergencies. You run a tight ship, Claire observed, genuinely impressed by the level of organization. Had to learn to. When you're managing a place this size alone, if you don't stay organized, things fall through the cracks pretty quickly. Thomas picked up a clipboard from a workbench. This is the daily checklist. Nothing complicated, just making sure all the important stuff gets done every day. Claire studied the list, noting the thoroughness of Thomas's approach to ranch management. Water levels, feed distribution, fence integrity, equipment maintenance, weather monitoring. It was clear that he took his responsibilities seriously and had developed systems to ensure nothing was overlooked. How long have you been doing this alone? She asked. 3 years, mostly. Had some part-time help until recently, but it's been just me for the last few months. Thomas replaced the clipboard and began organizing some tools that didn't really need organizing. Gets to be a routine after a while. Doesn't it get lonely? The question was asked so gently that Thomas found himself answering before he'd really considered the implications. Sometimes. But animals are good company, and there's always enough work to keep your mind occupied. That's not the same thing as human connection, though. Thomas looked at her sharply, wondering if she was making a point about his solitary lifestyle or simply making conversation. Her expression was neutral, curious rather than judgmental. No, it's not. But human connections can be complicated. Animals are straightforward. You know where you stand with them. True. But they can't make you laugh at dinner or help you figure out a problem you're stuck on, or... Claire trailed off, seeming to realize she was venturing into personal territory. Or what? Or make you feel like you're part of something bigger than just your own daily survival? She flushed slightly as if embarrassed by the admission. Sorry, I don't mean to get philosophical. It's just that I spent a lot of years in a marriage where I felt completely alone, even though I was never actually by myself. Sometimes being truly alone is better than being lonely in company. I understood exactly what she meant, though my own experience with loneliness came from different circumstances. How long were you married? 6 years. Met him in veterinary school, got married right after graduation. Seemed like a good partnership at the time, two people with similar interests and compatible goals. Turns out compatibility on paper doesn't mean much if one person thinks partnership means the other person does whatever they're told. He controlled everything. Everything he could. Where we lived, how we spent money, what jobs I could take, who we socialized. It happened gradually, so I didn't really notice until I was already in too deep to see a way out easily. The clinic was his idea, his financing, his name on everything. I was just the staff, even though I did most of the actual work. Thomas felt that anger rise again, sharper this time. What changed? What made you finally leave? Claire was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He started talking about having children.
Said it was time to expand our family, make our legacy permanent. But the way he talked about it, about how the children would be raised, what their lives would look like, she shuddered slightly. I realized I couldn't bring children into that environment. Couldn't risk them growing up thinking that kind of control was normal or healthy. So you left. So I left. Took Brigitte, emptied my personal savings account, and drove away while he was at a conference. I knew if I tried to do it properly, tried to discuss it or negotiate, he'd find a way to stop me or make it impossible. Claire looked up at Thomas, and he could see the mixture of regret and determination in her dark eyes. I know it wasn't the most mature way to handle it, but it was the only way that felt safe. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding more than she probably realized. Sometimes walking away is the most mature thing you can do, even if it doesn't look like it from the outside. Do you really think so, or are you just being kind? I really think so. It takes courage to leave a situation that's comfortable but wrong. Most people stay in bad situations because they're afraid of the unknown, even when they know the known isn't working. Claire smiled, the first truly relaxed smile he'd seen from her since her arrival the night before. The wariness was still there, but it had softened into something more like natural caution rather than defensive fear. Can I ask you something now? Fair's fair. Why did you really offer to let us stay? I mean, I'm grateful, but it's not exactly normal to take in strangers with unusual livestock and French cats. There has to be more to it than just needing help around the ranch. Thomas considered the question carefully, recognizing that she deserved an honest answer. Partly because you looked like you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Partly because I could tell you weren't the kind of person who would take advantage of kindness. But mostly, he paused, searching for the right words. Mostly because when I watched you with those lambs, saw how you protected them and cared for them even though you were obviously struggling yourself, I recognized something. What did you recognize? Someone who understands that taking care of something vulnerable is a responsibility that doesn't end just because it becomes inconvenient or difficult. Thomas set down his sandwich and leaned back in his chair. Too many people these days give up on commitments the minute they become challenging. You drove around for weeks with 2 orphaned lambs, bottle feeding them every few hours because they needed you. That says something about your character. Claire looked down at her hands, color rising in her cheeks. I couldn't just leave them. No, you couldn't. Most people would have found them a shelter or a farm and moved on. You made them your responsibility and saw it through, even when it made your own situation more complicated. That's not common anymore. Maybe I just like complications. Maybe you just like doing the right thing, even when it's hard. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a pickup truck coming up the drive, dust billowing behind it in the afternoon heat. Thomas straightened in his chair, recognizing the vehicle as belonging to his neighbor, Frank Morrison, whose ranch bordered his property to the east. "Expecting company?" Claire asked, noting his change in posture. "Not exactly. That's Frank Morrison, owns the spread next door. He's probably coming to check out the new arrivals." Thomas stood as the truck pulled to a stop near the porch. "Frank isn't a bad guy, but he's got strong opinions about things, how they should be done, and isn't shy about sharing them." Frank Morrison emerged from his truck with the confident stride of a man who owned land for most of his 60-plus years. He was tall and weathered, with the kind of deep tan that came from decades of outdoor work, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who didn't miss much. "Thomas," Frank called out, climbing the porch steps with familiar ease. "Heard you had some interesting new arrivals." "News travels fast," Thomas replied dryly. "Frank Morrison, meet Claire Dubois. Claire, this is my neighbor Frank." Claire stood politely, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Morrison."
Morrison. Frank's handshake was firm, and his assessment of Claire was thorough, but not unfriendly. "Likewise. Heard you've got some unusual livestock with you." "Twin lambs and a cat," Claire confirmed. "We're just passing through, helping Thomas with some ranch work while we figure out our next move." "Passing through," Frank repeated, his tone suggesting he found the phrase interesting. "How long is passing through these days?" Thomas intervened before Claire could answer. "As long as it needs to be. Claire's a trained veterinary technician, and I could use the help with the animals." Frank's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Now that's useful. Doc Martinez is getting on in years, and it's a long drive to town when you've got an animal emergency." He turned back to Claire. "What's your experience with large animals?" 8 years in a mixed practice, everything from household pets to cattle and horses. I'm comfortable with routine care, emergency treatment, and most surgical procedures short of major operations." "Impressive." Frank settled into an empty chair without invitation, clearly planning to stay for a while. "Mind if I ask what brings a qualified veterinary technician to our little corner of nowhere?" Claire's expression tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Career change. Wanted to try something different." Frank studied her face with the sharp attention of someone who had spent years reading people and situations. Thomas could practically see him cataloging details and drawing conclusions, though he kept his observations to himself. "Well," Frank said finally, "if you're going to be here for a while, you should know that we look out for each other in these parts. Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold when you're miles from town and dealing with unpredictable animals and weather." "I appreciate that," Claire said, and Thomas could hear genuine gratitude in her voice. "I hope to be a good neighbor while I'm here." "I'm sure you will be." Frank stood, apparently satisfied with whatever assessment he'd been conducting. "Thomas, if you need any help getting Claire oriented to local suppliers and services, let me know. And if you need an extra hand with any heavy work while she's recovering from that leg injury, just holler." Thomas felt a flash of irritation at Frank's assumption that Claire's injury was something that needed to be worked around rather than respected, but Claire spoke before he could respond. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. The leg's healing well, but I appreciate the offer." After Frank left, they finished their lunch in thoughtful silence. Thomas could see that the encounter had stirred up emotions in Claire, though she was working hard to keep them hidden. "He seems nice," she said finally. "He is, mostly. Frank's old school, believes in traditional ways of doing things, but he's fair, and he keeps his word." Thomas gathered their empty plates. "He'll spread the word that you're here and that you're under my protection, so to speak. That'll make things easier if you need to deal with other locals." "Under your protection?" "Poor choice of words. I mean that you're part of my operation, not just a random stranger. People will treat you differently because of that association." Claire nodded, understanding the social dynamics involved. "Good to know. I was wondering how the community would react to strangers showing up with unusual circumstances. Most folks around here mind their own business unless you give them reason not to. You pull your weight, treat people fairly, and respect the local customs, you'll be fine." They spent the afternoon working on smaller maintenance tasks that allowed Claire to contribute without putting too much strain on her healing leg. She proved adept at equipment maintenance,
demonstrating a mechanical aptitude that impressed Thomas and saved him time on routine repairs. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin so Claire could tend to the lambs and check on Brigitte. The cat had claimed the sunny windowsill in the living room and appeared to be holding court with several barn cats who had gathered outside, creating an amusing tableau of feline diplomacy. "Dinner?" Thomas asked as Claire finished settling the animals for the evening. "I promised you real food, and I keep my promises. I could cook, give you a break from kitchen duty. Tomorrow. Tonight you're still recovering, and I'm still showing off my hospitality." Thomas smiled. "Besides, I make a decent stew, and it's been simmering all afternoon." The stew was indeed excellent, rich and satisfying with the kind of depth of flavor that came from patience and quality ingredients. They ate at Thomas's kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between topics of ranch management, animal care, and general observations about rural life. "This is really good," she said, savoring another spoonful. "Are you cooking like this regularly, or were you trying to impress the new hire?" "Little of both," Thomas admitted. "I enjoy cooking when I have time for it, but most nights it's pretty basic. Having someone to cook for makes it more worthwhile to put in the effort." "I can relate to that. When I was married, I used to love planning elaborate meals, trying new recipes. After I left, it seemed pointless to go to all that trouble just for myself." "What changed? What made you start cooking for yourself again?" Claire considered the question while she buttered a piece of fresh bread. "Honestly, Brigitte. She has very particular standards for her food, and watching me eat poorly seemed to offend her sensibilities. She started bringing me dead mice as gifts, which I think was her way of saying I needed to take better care of myself." Thomas laughed. "A cat with a conscience." "A cat with opinions about proper nutrition. She's French, after all." As they cleaned up after dinner, Thomas found himself appreciating the domestic efficiency of working alongside someone who understood kitchen rhythms and responsibilities. Claire washed while he dried, their movements coordinated and comfortable despite having known each other for less than 24 hours. "Thank you," Claire said as they finished, "for everything today. The work, the food, the company. It's been a long time since I felt this normal."
What does normal feel like? Like I belong somewhere, at least temporarily. Like I'm useful and appreciated instead of just tolerated or managed. Claire hung up the dish towel and turned to face him. Like I'm a person with value instead of just a problem to be solved. The vulnerability in her admission caught Thomas off guard, and he found himself responding before he'd carefully considered his words. "You're definitely not a problem to be solved. If anything, you've solved several problems I didn't even realize I had." "Such as?" "Such as having someone to share meals with who appreciates good food. Such as having help with the animals from someone who actually knows what they're doing instead of just muddling through. Such as having another perspective on ranch management decisions." Thomas paused, then added quietly, "Such as having someone to talk to who understands that silence doesn't always mean something's wrong." Claire smiled, the expression transforming her face from pretty to genuinely beautiful. "You're not much like my ex-husband." "Good. Very good." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thomas, the arrangement we discussed, about me staying to help with the ranch work, what about it? I'd like to make it official, if you're still willing. Not just passing through, but actually staying and learning and contributing. Building something instead of just surviving day to day." Thomas felt something settle in his chest, a satisfaction he hadn't expected. "I'd like that too. We can work out the details as we go, but yes, I'd like you to stay." "Good. Because I think Brigitte has already started redecorating the cabin to her specifications, and I'd hate to disappoint her by leaving before she's finished." That night, Thomas sat on his porch, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into evening quiet. But tonight, the sounds were different, richer somehow. From the cabin came the soft murmur of Claire's voice as she talked to the lambs,
and occasionally the melodious response of Brigitte offering commentary on the day's events. For the first time in years, the ranch felt complete, rather than just functional. He had no illusions that everything would be simple or easy. People never were. But Claire had brought something to Cedar Ridge that he hadn't realized was missing. Life, movement, the sense that each day held possibility rather than just routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new discoveries as they continued to learn how to work together and build something that neither of them could create alone. But tonight, Thomas fell asleep to the comforting knowledge that he was no longer the sole guardian of his small corner of the world. In the cabin, Claire settled the lambs for the night and gave Brigitte a final scratch behind the ears before heading to bed herself. Her leg ached from the day's activities, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from useful work rather than aimless wandering. For the first time since leaving her marriage, she felt hopeful about the future. Not just optimistic, but genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring. She had found more than just shelter at Cedar Ridge. She had found a chance to build the kind of life she had always wanted but never quite known how to create. As she drifted off to sleep, Claire smiled at the sound of Bonnie and Clyde's soft breathing and Brigitte's contented purring. They were all safe, all cared for, all part of something larger than their individual survival. Tomorrow would test that growing sense of belonging, as tomorrow always did. But tonight, it was enough to rest in the knowledge that they had found a place where they were wanted for who they were, rather than tolerated despite it. 3 weeks had woven themselves into the fabric of Cedar Ridge like golden thread through sturdy cloth. Claire's injury had healed to the point where only the steepest terrain reminded her of that difficult night when everything changed. The lambs had doubled in size, their playful energy now requiring creative solutions to keep them from turning the ranch into their personal playground. Brigitte had appointed herself unofficial ranch manager, appearing wherever important decisions were being made with the air of a consultant whose opinion carried significant weight. She had also formed an unlikely friendship with Luna, often found perched on the mare's back during afternoon grooming sessions. The morning routine had become second nature. Thomas would arrive at the cabin with fresh coffee just as Claire finished settling the animals for breakfast. They'd plan the day while watching Bonnie and Clyde perfect their morning gymnastics, then head out to tackle whatever challenges the ranch presented. It was during one of these peaceful planning sessions that the rumble of an unfamiliar engine broke the morning calm. The vehicle that emerged from the tree line was sleek and expensive, its silver paint gleaming despite the dust kicked up by the gravel road. Claire's coffee mug slipped from sudden nerveless fingers, shattering against the porch boards. "No," she whispered, the color draining from her face as recognition dawned. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his body moving between Claire and the approaching car with protective instinct. "Who is it?" "David, my ex-husband." Her voice was barely audible, but Thomas caught the tremor of fear beneath the words. The Mercedes came to a precise stop near the main house, its engine purring with German efficiency before falling silent. The man who emerged looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine, every detail of his appearance calculated to project success and authority. Dr. David Rousseau surveyed the ranch with the dismissive gaze of someone evaluating a quaint but ultimately impractical lifestyle choice. His expensive shoes were entirely unsuited to the terrain, and his designer jacket seemed absurdly formal against the backdrop of working buildings and honest dirt. "How did he find you?" Thomas asked quietly. "Does it matter now?" Claire's hands were shaking, but her voice was growing steadier. "He's here." David spotted them on the porch and approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having doors opened and questions answered. His smile was practiced, the expression of a politician or salesman who knew the value of charm. "Claire," he called, his tone carrying the warm authority of someone addressing a wayward child.
We need to discuss your little adventure." "No, we don't," Claire replied, standing slowly but keeping her shoulders square. "We said everything that needed saying when I left." "You left without giving us a chance to work through our problems. That's not how marriages function, Claire. We solve things together, remember?" David's voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused student. Thomas felt his jaw clench at the condescension dripping from every syllable. "The lady said no. Seems clear enough to me." David's attention shifted to Thomas for the first time, his assessment quick and dismissive. The work clothes, the calloused hands, the general appearance of someone who earned his living through physical labor apparently told him everything he thought he needed to know. "And you are?" The question carried just enough courtesy to avoid outright rudeness. "Thomas Bennett. This is my land." "Ah." David's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I see Claire has found herself another project. She always did have a weakness for broken things that needed fixing." The casual cruelty of the comment hit its mark, and Thomas saw Claire flinch as if she'd been slapped. His own temper flared, but Claire spoke before he could respond. "I'm not fixing anything here, David. I'm building something. There's a difference." "Building what?" "Claire, look around. This is subsistence living dressed up as romance. You're a trained professional with advanced skills, and you're wasting them playing farmer with—" His gesture toward Thomas made his opinion clear without requiring actual words. "I'm using my skills exactly where I want to use them," Claire said firmly. "For the first time in years, I'm doing work that matters to me." "Work that matters?" David's laugh was sharp with disbelief.
I just provided backup. Still, it meant everything to have someone on my side instead of trying to convince me that his perspective was the reasonable one. Claire picked up David's business card and tore it methodically into small pieces. He wasn't entirely wrong about one thing, though. This won't always be easy. Building something real never is. Worth doing anyway? Especially because it won't be easy. The best things require effort, commitment, the willingness to work through problems instead of running away when things get complicated. Claire smiled, the first genuine expression she'd shown since David's arrival. "I'm done running." "Good, because I'd like you to stay. Not just temporarily, not just until you figure out your next move. Permanently, as my full partner in everything." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than sadness. "Are you sure? You barely know me, and my life comes with complications." "I know enough. I know you're honest, hardworking, and brave enough to start over when something isn't working. I know you're good with animals, good with people, and smart enough to make this place better than I could ever make it alone." Thomas reached over and took her hand. "I know that for the first time in years, I look forward to waking up each morning because I know the day will be interesting and worthwhile." "Thomas, I've never been in a real partnership before. I don't know the rules or the expectations or how to navigate disagreements between equals." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together, make mistakes, learn from them, do better next time. That's what partners do." Claire squeezed his hand tightly. "What does partnership mean to you, practically, I mean?" "It means your name goes on everything alongside mine. It means we make major decisions together, share the profits and losses equally, support each other's ideas even when we don't fully understand them." Thomas paused, then added quietly, "It means building something neither of us could create alone." "And personally?" "Personally, it means I want to spend my days working beside you and my evenings planning our future together. It means I want to know what you think about everything, not because I need permission, but because your perspective makes me smarter.
He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "It means I'm falling in love with you, and I'd like the chance to see where that leads." Claire's tears spilled over then, but her smile was radiant. "I'm falling in love with you too, with this place, with the life we're building, with the person I get to be when I'm with you." "So, you'll stay? Officially, permanently, as my full partner in everything?" "Yes, to all of it. Partnership, love, building something lasting together." Claire wiped her eyes with her free hand. "Though I should warn you, Brigitte has very specific expectations about her living arrangements, and she's not shy about expressing her opinions. I think we can accommodate Brigitte's requirements. She's proven herself a valuable member of the team." As if summoned by her name, the gray cat appeared from around the corner of the house, moving with regal dignity toward the porch. She surveyed the scene with intelligent green eyes, seeming to sense that important decisions had been made in her absence. "Meow," she commented, her tone suggesting approval of the proceedings. "She says it's about time we made things official," Claire translated with a laugh. "Tell her the management appreciates her patience during the transition period." That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, watching Bonnie and Clyde practice their evening grazing routine while Brigitte supervised from her favorite perch on the fence rail. The scene was peaceful, but it carried an undercurrent of excitement about the future they were planning to build together. "So what happens now?" Claire asked. "Now we make it legal. Paperwork, bank accounts, insurance policies, all the practical stuff that makes partnership official." Thomas pulled her closer, enjoying the way she fit perfectly against his side. "But first, we celebrate." "How do we celebrate?" "However you want. Dinner in town, dancing on the porch, or just sitting here planning all the ways we're going to make this place amazing." "All of the above sounds perfect." Claire rested her head on his shoulder, feeling some final knot of tension release in her chest. "Thomas?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for seeing something in me worth keeping, worth building a future with. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued for who I am, instead of tolerated despite who I am. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on something new, even when it meant leaving everything familiar behind." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "I think we're going to be amazing together." "I think so too." The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and a ranch around them settled into the comfortable rhythms of evening. From the cabin came the soft sounds of contented animals, and from somewhere in the distance came the call of an owl greeting the night. For two people who had learned the difference between surviving and thriving, between being alone and being lonely, it was everything they had never dared to hope for. They had found not just love, but partnership, not just shelter, but home, not just safety, but the chance to build something meaningful together. As the night deepened around Cedar Ridge, Thomas and Claire remained on the porch, planning their shared future with the quiet confidence of people who had finally found exactly where they belonged. The ranch that had been Thomas's refuge became their foundation, and the arrangement that had begun as temporary assistance evolved into something deeper and more lasting than either had imagined possible. And if sometimes Claire still moved carefully on cold mornings, and if Brigitte still offered commentary on household decisions in accented meows, and if Bonnie and Clyde occasionally created chaos that required creative solutions, well, those were just the kinds of beautiful complications that made life interesting for people who had learned that the best families are the ones you choose and nurture with intention and love. In the end, they had both found something they hadn't even known they were looking for, a true partner to share not just the work of daily living, but the joy of building dreams into reality. Together, they had created something bigger than the sum of its parts, something worth staying for, something worth calling home.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.